Chapter 5, Teaching English in the Context of World Englishes. Some goals for your learning and takeaways include understanding World Englishes. What are some of the consequences of including World Englishes in an English as a second or foreign language curriculum? As a teacher, how are you going to decide which variety or varieties of English to teach to a given group of second or foreign language learners? And right away, we will be looking at a teacher named Suzanne who is faced with the difficult decision on whether it's better and more effective to use her well-known general American pronunciation to teach her students or the opposing pronunciation that she was given to teach out of the textbook. You'll also become aware of the varieties of English, both native and non-native, and how to accommodate and implement these concepts in the classroom. So first I want to tell the story of Suzanne. You can just listen to the story and then definitely keep it in mind until the end because this is easily relatable to the various concepts you'll learn throughout the text. Suzanne is an American Peace Corps volunteer working at a regional teacher training college in Nigeria. She has a bachelor in linguistics and some training in teaching English to speakers of other languages. She has been teaching advanced English language courses and methods classes to Nigerians preparing to teach English in middle school. The principal of Suzanne's college, a Nigerian, gave her a class set of English pronunciation textbooks based on British received pronunciation. She told her to teach a course in pronunciation to all the prospective English teachers. Suzanne is not a native speaker of British English. She does her best trying to imitate well-known British accent and actress Helen Mirren. However, as soon as she speaks naturally, she always reverts to her native general American pronunciation. Her students can notice a difference and see her fluctuating between pronunciations. The example they use is the way that Suzanne pronounces water. Suzanne tries to explain her dilemma to the students that she has grown up speaking general American pronunciation of English, but now has to change to the British pronunciation. We'll come back to this situation later to maybe consider how Suzanne should respond to her students and the overall picture of what this means for language curriculum. First, we're going to dive into World Englishes. So what are World Englishes? By definition, World Englishes are regionally distinct variations of English that have arisen in areas of Asia, Africa, and so many more. Here, there's a long history of English being used in several aspects of society. Over time, the English has taken on a variety of standards. So here are some examples of where you'll see World Englishes: Indian English, West African English, Filipino English, Singapore English, all different types of variations. So this is this figure from the textbook that is extremely influential to the argument of World Englishes and how they should be included in the curriculum. So first is the expanding circle. This is on the outside. Countries where English is a dominant foreign language used in limited domains but is beginning to become a lingua franca. So we will talk more about the word right here you see, lingua franca, but to give you the definition now, it is language that is adopted as a common language between speakers whose native language is different. So it's just an adaptation of the English variation. But we'll talk about more of that later. The next one is the outer circle, and make sure you're paying attention to the different numbers that you see in here. The outer circle in this diagram is countries where English had a long history of use and where local L2 varieties have developed and become codified. Now, we've discussed L2 in the past in other chapters, so you can look back to those to see definitions. Next is the inner circle, and this is English is the native language of my majority. So about 320 to 380 million people have English as a native language. And this is important to know because English is becoming an international language. As noted in the text, most of the world speaks English, the majority. Now let's get into variations of English. Native speakers are born and raised with the language they speak with. So, however they speak in that language, that's what they've been raised to do since birth. Most recent linguists question the role of native speakers. So traditionally, native speakers have been valued as ideal language teachers and models of norm, but more recently, linguists contemplate if this is true or not. English takes on different variations based on location, and this is a huge part of variations of English. So, based on where you are and the location and the people that surround you, that will determine what pronunciation and grammatical differences take place in your variation of English. So, as we can see here, grammatical and pronunciation differences between English variations. So, if I, growing up in New York, in America, spoke to someone in England, they would have a different variation of English than I do. That's a huge part of it. Because of the varieties of English that have been developed, language becomes intelligible to users of other varieties. So what this is saying is that because there's so many different varieties of English, at some point does this language become almost not understandable to users of other English varieties. So this is when we're confronted with that major problem that they might not be fully intelligible for other users because English has changed so much based on location. So there's one extreme where the goal of national or regional identity. So people use a regional variety of English with its specific grammar to affirm their own national or ethnic identity. So basically, what this is saying is English language based on location. It's specific to the people in that particular language. So they develop it and they speak it in their daily lives. On the other hand, there's the goal of intelligibility. Users of a regional variety should ideally still be readily intelligible to other users of English everywhere else in the world to fully participate in the use of English as an international language. So on the other side, where many speculators say that if we're going to be seeing English as an international language, we must be able to speak it to one another, and it can't take on many differences that we wouldn't be able to understand each other. So you should still be able to speak and understand users of other variations of English is the main point. So we have two extremes here on how we should implement the variations of English in society. Should it be based on specific to the people in that particular location, or should we focus it more on that everyone should be able to speak and understand each other in the same variety of English, or close to? Okay, so we talked about this point, language that is adopted as a common language between speaker whose native language is different. So what's the problem in this chapter? The grammatical and pronunciation differences between English variations may be detrimental to understanding communicating. So this is just like we talked about in the last slide, that we have two extremes. Do we keep it so that English variation is dependent on your location and you form that and adjust to what's at your location, or should it be more of a universal language? Using native speaker norms is questionable, and language variation is pervasive in all communities of use. So, how are we going to implement this in the classroom? Let's look at what Suzanne should have done. So, if you don't really remember what happened in the story, you can go back and listen to me tell it again. But this is what Suzanne should have done. She could have tried comparative work, showing students the difference between her variation of English, the general American one, versus the British version. And she should show the differences and maybe even the similarities between those and give the students a better understanding. She might need to adjust teaching to her students, accommodating with their variations. So if the students are comfortable with the British pronunciation, then Suzanne, as their teacher, should find herself adjusting to that as well and become more familiar with it and comfortable with it and implement that in the classroom. The prospective teachers make minor adjustments in their pronunciation in favor of greater cross varietal intelligibility. So the teachers might have to make those adjustments in their pronunciation. If that's where their English variation lies, then they must accommodate to that. Teachers must become sensitized to the many varieties of English being used in the world today and should be prepared to make their trainees aware of this. The biggest point to what should be done in the classroom is awareness and training. Teachers should be aware of this, the many varieties of English being used, and they should be trained. It is not something to just brush off. Thinking globally but acting locally. So this means that local educators are the best positioned to understand what their learners need to know. So think globally, think the best, what's going to be the best for them. But locally, meaning what is the variation that they're learning locally? This is the one that they're going to be most familiar with. Give students the tools to educate themselves about using their English effectively and communicating across variations. So, students should be able to educate themselves about which English to use effectively going across variations. So, here are the key points of this chapter that you should really understand. English has become a world language and is the language most widely used and taught in the world today. There are many varieties of English, both native and non native. Awareness of this reality needs to become a part of teacher training and English language instruction. Non native varieties of English include either World Englishes, which is the outer circle in the figure I showed you, and ELF, which is the lingua franca, emerging expanding circle. The needs and attitudes of students, teachers, and administrators often have an influence on the norm or standard adopted for instruction. It is thus best that local norms be respected whenever possible.